Wine Talks with Paul K.
This is Robert Mondavi Jr. From the Michael Mondavi Winery.
Opus One Winery with Michael Silacci.
Thank you for listening to Wine Talks with Paul Kalemkiarian. Don't forget to subscribe. Cheers.
Hey, welcome to Wine Talks with Paul K. And we are on a away game today up in the Napa Valley. About to have a conversation with Natalie Bath from the Rudd Estates. Introductions in just a moment. Wine Talks is available, of course, on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pandora, Stitcher, you name it, wherever you hang out for podcasts. And now sponsored by the Original Wine of the Month Club, supporting the Napa series and the Biodynamic Organic series, which will be one of our topics of conversation. But Natalie, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So first of all, the grounds are beautiful.
Oh,
I've never been in here. And the fact that I opened the rusty gates made me feel like I was really entering some cool place.
Almost like it's cool. Being transported to another dimension.
Isn't that what we want with wine anyway?
I do, for sure.
Transport people?
Exactly.
You know, I was, this is probably COVID related, but I'm staying in Yountville, and we usually stay at the Vintage House, nice place. They have a little bungalow on the street that's, it's a king-size bed, decent-sized bathroom, but nothing extraordinary. And it usually runs about $700 to $800 a night, which is expensive for any hotel, but still. $2,100 this week.
Ooh, that's no joke.
What's up with that?
Well, a little event called Premier Napa Valley is going on this weekend. A little bit different than previous years, but we're still seeing a lot of distributors, suppliers, buyers in the valley just excited to be back, but also excited to bid on some lots this year as well.
Well, last night at Jean Charles's event, the guy next to me had the auction up. So I guess it's virtual.
It is virtual this year.
And it's also live today, or parts of it?
I believe at noon it started today,
okay.
Yes.
And then I can come and buy. I mean, I didn't even recognize any of these things this guy was talking about. So these are absolute boutique vintages, and the money goes to where?
The money will actually go to support the valley here, and it's everything from different wineries making almost a barrel selection that you can bid on, and then you get a specific label that goes on it that a lot of people will showcase either in their retail store, in their restaurant as well. So something very special.
Yeah, that's see. So the value comes from that, and plus you're helping the value. And I think you mentioned the money goes to helping the pickers and different support families.
All different areas, exactly.
I wonder how those families were affected by COVID and the fires probably more. Right? I mean, how many jobs were lost from the fires?
It's hard to live in Napa Valley already based on the exorbitant prices for homes and even rentals here. And so a lot of, for us, employees and vineyard workers don't even live here in Napa Valley because it's too expensive. They actually live outside. And so while maybe they weren't directly impacted by the fires, like some people were here, COVID for sure, delayed a lot of work for certain people. But the interesting thing about the wine industry and growing grapes in particular is you can't really take a break even during a pandemic. It's farming, it's an agricultural endeavor. So we feel very fortunate and lucky that we still had jobs here to come to, and something almost to normalize the absolutely unbelievable situation the whole world was in.
Well, thank goodness for Governor Newsom. You don't hear many people saying that.
I was just going to say.
I said it for 30 days at the beginning of COVID because he owns a winery, Plump Jack, and he immediately made wineries essential. And thank goodness I have a wine manufacturing license where my office is in Southern California that hangs in Santa Rosa. And so I got to open. And so I told my staff this whole time, customer service and warehouses, you don't even know how fortunate we are to be working because everybody else is struggling and we're actually doing better. I mean, we had an incredible run. I think this is probably politically incorrect to say, where's COVID-20, but
True. No, the wine industry as a whole, I feel, obviously very selected with certain brands and properties, but depending on your list, people needed wine during this. And so some of us, maybe not as much as Amazon and Tesla and other companies like that did that well, but I think, for us, we held on pretty well.
It was two things interesting, not even on the list of things I want to talk about, but we're going to anyway. Two things that are interesting. One is many people came to the web to buy wine that otherwise weren't. So the metrics you get on the internet for when you're an e-commerce retailer is phenomenal. There's so much data you don't have to do with it. But one of them is how many new users came to the site and how many were returning, and that new user thing jumped. And so I think a lot of people were reluctant in the past to buy wine online because it's an emotional product.
Mm-hmm.
And so then it was determined and came true that the brands that people recognized, Stella Rosa, unfortunately, but still was sold a lot. But it was a good thing because people now can trust that they can buy a product like this online. It will arrive safely. It's guaranteed to be in the condition that you expect it to be in. Because wine's not like a widget where if you go to Amazon and you go, well, give me the cheapest batteries that are alkaline, and then you buy them, you don't do what's the cheapest wine. You do what is my wine.
Exactly.
So that was a good thing. The other thing that happened is the increase in the average bottle price.
Yes.
So I'm wondering, from your experience, or from your experience, meaning draw a conclusion to this, can you go back? So if you're buying $40 cabs now or $30 Sauvignon Blancs or whatever, when you were buying 12 and 14, are we going to be able to go back? Even though there's nothing wrong with either, those $12 wines are very good ones, but you've experienced something now, hopefully.
Exactly. And I think what the beauty of wine is there is something for everyone, and it can and also be reflected in the price of it. And so like you said, there is a time and a place for a $12 wine. There is a place for a $40 wine. But what I think the important thing is that once people have tasted, a 25, 40, 60, 80, they learn to appreciate it in a different way. And I think rather than treating wine as just a very quaffable throwback type of product, it can actually be viewed in a way just a little bit more elevated with a meal, with friends, creating an experience rather than something that comes just in a can that looks like everything else.
Oh, you brought up cans already, but
Ooh,
that was
hot
early.
topic.
That's early on.
Talked a lot about that last night, actually.
Well, it's we're going to peel that back too.
Good.
But you hit something very important, and I've been talking about it with my customers and other winemakers and foodies, you name it. Because the same applies with food. When it comes to that experience that takes you someplace else, and wine being the product that can do that. There's very few products in the world, if not any, that you can have a sense of time and place, as Mike Salachi puts it, as you heard. But it's so true. And evidenced by one conversation with a winemaker in Armenia, no less, who Michel Roland told her, oh, now that we realize you can grow grapes here, you've got 100 years to figure out what it can do. And she's like, 100 years? I'm only 35, I'm not going to make it. But her comment was, and let's just take your Sauvignon Blanc, the 2018, that's so gorgeous here.
Thank you.
You can take that to France next week, plop it on the table at a restaurant in Paris and say, this is who we are. And it speaks to that. There's no other product that does that.
No. And, I think that's something that people are learning, and it goes to that concept of terroir. We're stewards of the site right here, and no one's going to be able to produce a wine like ours based on the land. And a lot of that, as we'll go into it with certain styles of farming, are the best way of making sure you're expressing that, because then people are going to feel that, whether you're taking it, like you said, to Paris or drinking this, at your grandmother's house in North Carolina. I think, this wine is always going to take you back to this place in particular.
So much of wine is experience. And you talked about it with cans, and we won't bring it up quite yet, but I can't tell you how many people have texted me from vacation and said, can you get this? I get it. And they say it doesn't taste the same. And it's because, they're not in front of the Eiffel Tower, at their favorite trattoria or their brasserie. And it's a combination of what's in the bottle and what you're experiencing. And when it's not part of what you're experiencing, in other words, you want to step away from what you're experiencing, a wine can do that too. It can just sort of, now Jack Daniels will do that.
It takes you to a different place, good or bad.
So you brought it up, and I want to talk about the farming techniques because
Yes.
it's so important. And I taste a lot of biodynamic organic wines. I see you're a flag waver of both. And I just got done with a wine podcast where his opinion was he's going to stay conventional probably as long as he's there. And it's a very interesting push-pull on this whole subject. But I was thinking driving over here, since we're going to talk about it, I thought, for me, when I taste Tuesdays, I taste somewhere between 60 and 75 wines every Tuesday. I'd say right now about half of them are either certified organic, biodynamic, or at least farmed that way. Mm-hmm. And so I want to discuss briefly the idea of a winery that decides that they're going to do this, but doesn't go through the certification.
Yes.
Just because their kids are crawling around the vineyard, right?
Yes.
And then we go into the biodynamic thing. So is the certification sort of a marketing thing, we're trying to put on the back label as opposed to a philosophy?
I think it can be used in a very positive way, and I do think it can be used in a marketing technique. And I think with the way the food industry has been going, I think people in general want to know what they're putting into their bodies. They care about eating, organic food, but they weren't thinking about what they were actually drinking and ingesting. And for me, I think anything that is less is better. Anything that's in a way not adding on another checklist of those 76 additives, that you're allowed to add that people don't know about. And it starts in the vineyard. And so with that, for us, we know we're here right now as stewards of this property, but for how long? And the goal for us is longevity. It went from Leslie Rudd, our founder, to his daughter Samantha Rudd now, and hopefully to her 2 boys. And so a way of ensuring that is actually through using less chemicals and certain things and products out in the vineyard, because you're killing that soil. This is something that we want to hope, like the Armenian woman, maybe she won't be there in 100 years, but the next person is going to take it over. And so leaving your impact by not leaving an impact in a way. And so for us, yes, it's good to talk about organic and biodynamic. The Valley is still very far behind in that regard, in my point of view. Mm-hmm. I think under 20% of people are organic here. But for me, yes, if kids are crawling around in the vineyard, it is great to know that you're not worried about them wiping a bunch of chemicals. But I do think it doesn't need to be, the only thing you talk about as well.
There's, I think the stewards of the earth is a really important concept. Mm-hmm. Forget the grapes for a second, or whether they're radishes or carrots. It doesn't matter. It's what you're leaving behind. I think that's a really important concept. In Dan Berger's The Third Plate, he talks about how screwed up the farms are in general, not grapes necessarily, but wheat and other farms are just a mess, and it takes a long time. 3 years is probably not enough in some cases to clean it up and then go back to that. But at the same time, he makes the argument to feed the world organically, it would be difficult to do because of the production volume. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of a push me, pull you on this situation. But I think the idea of protecting the ground is a really positive thing to do, and can be done in the grape world too, and still produce wines that are really, really quality. But you said something funny, the additives. There's 76 additives from, sulfur to, defoaming agents and all kinds of things that you can do. And I want to ask you about some of them. But one story I have, and a gentleman just passed away, Mr. Galliano from the Galliano Winery in Cucamonga. Great guy. We used to have a lot of laughs together. He just passed away. But one day I went to his office. He still has those 1,500-gallon, redwood staved, beautiful barrels, and he has a contemporary vintage Zinfandel. Maybe it was, a year old at the most, and he puts it in a glass, and it was prematurely orange. And I go, Don, I don't. It's hard for me to sell my customers a wine of that color. He goes, we can fix that. So we went to the lab, and he got, what is it, big red or mega purple, and he drops in the glass, and bling, the whole thing came to beautiful. And I thought, wow, I don't know if I can do that. So tell me about some of these 76 chemicals. Are they all chemicals, rotten chemicals for us to ingest? Are they some of them natural in the sense of like sulfur being natural?
Yeah, I think, a lot of them you are unnatural, meaning that they don't come from the grape itself like sulfur does. Some of them are for stabilizing purposes, for the longevity of the wine. Mm-hmm. Some of them, I think, are enhancing a wine that maybe isn't great, but a helpful element.
Acidulating, sugar.
Things like that. I think it's all in a way to kind of help bring about a better product. And so I think to each their own, but I do think it's important that people are told what they're enjoying. I think Ridge, which I think may have started, I'm not actually sure, but their labels actually have an ingredients on the back. Yes. And I love that, because I think there's kind of this honesty and a transparency that you don't see in this industry about what people are adding to their wine. So I think if you are going to put certain things in there, your audience has a right to know. So just being a little bit more transparent. Do I agree with the fact you can add all these things? No, but some people have made incredible businesses out of them.
Well, yeah, that's true. Let's see if I can articulate this question, because I taste a lot of wine. Some wines are clearly doctored with, and some could be, and I just can't detect it. But do you think that the aging value of a wine, like let's say I acidulate the wine, it's not the natural acid that came from the fermentation or the grape, so I had to add it. In general, when a wine ages, if it's out of balance when it's young, it's going to be out of balance when it's old. But if you add the balance, it seems to me that added balance, or that added acid, added sugar to bring it into balance, is going to react differently with age than the natural version of it.
I agree.
And it's going to separate even more.
Yes.
And so you will detect that. Now, sometimes it's easy to detect early, sometimes stuff, I guess you probably would know. The stuff I taste sometimes is just so bad. Because you can make good wine from bad. You can't make good wine from bad grapes, but they do the other way around. So here at Rudd, was this a conscious decision? How long ago?
This was something that we started getting into back in 2014. We decided to go from a farming company to bringing in our own farming crews. That meant that our crew only farmed our two sites, the one here in Oakville and the one up on Mount Veeder. And that meant that we were looking for focusing on our vineyard and not doing almost like a cookie cutter style of grape growing where our vineyard looked just like the neighbors and the next door. And so for us, it was really back in 14 that on top of not only having a crew that worked on our site alone, but really focusing on the health of the vineyard. And so it's about a 3-year process to get certified organic. And so from 2014 up until 2017, we had to work on that, got fully certified in 17. And that's when myself and our vineyard manager at the time started really looking into biodynamics. And there are some people here in the Valley who had already been doing it for a very long time. I had worked for another property back in 2011 that was, Ted Lemon of Litterai, who is considered one of the biggest proponents of it without being certified as well, by the way. And so I think there's a lot of people that have been doing it, and we started learning and realizing if we could take care of our property, be very site specific in a very holistic agriculture fashion, that would only enhance the wine down the road. Now, that being said, our wines are not certified biodynamic, but it's something we practice out in the vineyard. Our wine is not certified organic, but our vineyard is. And so while the wine itself does have sulfur added to it, which is why we can't, get the certification in certain levels, I think as long as we're not adding anything that's unnatural to the wine, we've only seen the wine develop and have a little bit more lift and a little bit more of an expression that's unique here.
I think that's a common conception amongst most winemakers, that sulfur is and can be organic, but it's natural. The Bordelais invented the idea how many years ago to do it, and it's been used in that practices, and there was no real, I have to tell clients, I said, look, if a vineyard is in a desperate straits to be mildewed, we're going to sulfur it, to stop it. We're not going to allow the whole crop to be lost. We have enough headaches and headwinds as it is in this business.
Exactly.
This is the question. You and I go to the market.
Yes.
I've just the very famous chefs of the United States, and I've got a 50-50 split. We go to the market together. I go to, actually in Santa Monica, there's a very famous chef's market, and you can get conventional vegetables, you can get organic vegetables, and all locally grown. And you and I pick the same vegetables. We go home, we cook things at the same temperature, present it the same way. Does one taste better than the other?
Ooh, that's a good question.
I do the same thing with steak, by the way. So you can
I
answer
love
either
that. My husband's a butcher, so I have some thoughts on that as well.
This question.
Exactly. So, your grass-fed or your corn-fed beef is a big topic in my house. But I think from a organic, conventional vegetable growing or fruit growing perspective, I think it's about how you feel. I think there's a level of, if you feel that you're putting something good into your body, it's going to translate that way. I think long-term effects of chemicals we haven't seen quite yet.
That's right.
Maybe it is, down the road we're seeing certain diseases and things come from it. But I think it has to be a personal choice. Do I think it necessarily tastes 100% better in a side-by-side tasting? I don't know. But I do think I'm going to feel better knowing that I've done my best to keep certain things out of my body.
It feels better.
Exactly.
Joachim Slichal, a very famous chef in LA, he worked for one of the greats in France. He worked in Nice. I mean, they were doing farm-to-table cooking in the 80s there. And he would go to the market at the seashore and get his seafood and shellfish, and then he would go to the farmer's market, and that's what they would cook at the restaurant. I do believe seasonality is a very important part of food consumption. You don't want to fool Mother Nature by growing something that shouldn't be grown that time. But the idea of whether it tastes better or not, I've had a lot of bad, bitter carrots from Whole Foods that were organic, and or tomatoes grown in Mexico that we don't know that they're organic practices are being followed. The biodynamic thing is another story, and I have a wonderful time discussing and trying to fathom it, because the definition of it is organic plus, right?
Yes.
It deals with when you plant the seeds, when you pick, the cycles of the moon, the gravitational pull, and the most impactful thing that's ever been said to me about this that makes you think is Piero Incenza, whose grandparents started Ornellaia or Sassicaia, one of the two super Tuscans, and he's growing Pinot Noir in Patagonia, Argentina, which is like a bizarre place for
Very
Pinot Noir. And he says, I found this completely untouched vineyard, and his wines are brilliantly crafted and extraordinarily different from year to year because of the farming practices. But his comment was, if the moon's gravitational pull can move oceans, that much water, and your body is 90% water, imagine what it's doing to you. And I thought, okay, that has a ton of sense to it, right? And when the grapes can absorb the water and their nutrients, when you pick them at the proper time. Does it deal with orientation of the bottles during storage? There's some comment made to me.
Yes, I believe you can go really far deep into the world of, you only bottle on certain days, you only rack on, ascending moons, and you only inoculate on certain days, you only pick on a fruit day. But from a farming perspective, I can tell you right now, we need to pick sometimes when we need to pick, and we can't wait for the root day to finish in 2 days for it to become a fruit. So I think it's an interpretation. I think you can take biodynamics to an extreme level, and I think you can also use it as just a healthier form of farming. Right. In terms of using it from a cellar perspective in a winery, I think there's some really interesting ideas behind it, and I definitely think, again, the less additives is an important part of that, but it's something that needs to be incorporated to work with your system that you've already started creating here.
Well, let's see. The most dramatic version of that, well, let me go back to Piero just for a second. He said, the armadillos are back. And I thought, I had this vision, right? There's rows of grapes and these armadillos walking around. And that was kind of cool. It was like, all right, that kind of makes sense. There's life back. And Dan Barber says in his book about the life under the soil that's happening. He says there's a war going on down there, because they're competing for nutrients. And there's, you can walk a wheat field and see where the soil might be short of nitrogen based on the weeds that are growing, and vice versa. And I think that's a really brilliant, interesting concept. But to take it to the next step, there was a Sardinian Sangiovese maker that was in my office a couple of years ago. And he said, well, what we did was we took, Bose, the manufacturing of music equipment, speakers and things, took a grapevine, put it in a room, and played rock music, and took the same grapevine and played classical music, and the grapevine that was hearing classical music grew toward the speaker, and the one rock played against it. He goes, so we have a full-on sound system in our vineyard.
I love that.
I don't know. I mean,
people do it in the winery. I know a lot of properties will have classical music playing overnight to lull their barrels. I can see the same translation in the vineyard. It's a long extension cord for
I would say, this
speakers.
is like hocus pocus, except my mother would talk to her fruit all the time. She'd go out and talk to the strawberries and the peaches and apricots, and was convinced that they were listening.
Well, I think like what you're saying, it's about an intention. It's about going out there to take care of this vineyard. It's going to take care of you and really having a very special relationship with your site. I think, of course, you can go far deep into what would be considered a voodoo aspect of it, and everything. But I think for us, we've only seen benefits. Is it tangible in terms of numbers? No. But again, it's that feeling. Same thing with eating certain fruits. Maybe you can't taste the difference necessarily right now, but long term, I'm going to feel much better about not spraying a bunch of stuff out there and just using chamomile, yarrow, cow manure, silica, which comes naturally from here.
There's one, my daughter took me to, I guess my listeners may have tired of this story, but it's an important story because she took me to a Brooklyn, she lives in New York, and she took me to a Brooklyn natural wine shop. And so I started studying natural wine to understand it. And of course, there's no definition of it. I get annoyed when people bring it in. When I sort of challenge salespeople now when they say this is natural. I'm like, what do you mean by that? And they don't really have an answer.
I think that's important.
SIP certified is one thing. They tell me that they're certified, then I understand what they're talking about. But so we reached down to the bottom of the shelf, and I grabbed a Nero d'Avola from Sicily, and my daughter's like, yeah, let's get this. And first of all, I put it up on the counter. It was $75. And I'm like, for Nero d'Avola from Sicily? All right, fine, Lisa. If you want me to buy it, I'll buy it. So we took it at the hotel, and it was unpalatable. There was nothing wrong.
No.
It wasn't that had turned or anything. It was just wasn't a good wine. And it leads me to the question that I've tasted. One of the things that it seems almost easier for me now after the wines we've tasted to define something that probably is organic or probably biodynamic than it is like to identify the grapes in a particular wine, because there is a freshness and a brilliance about them and a crispness about them that I can usually taste a wine before they say it's organic and say, is this organic? So that says something in itself. But I've also tasted them where they're so rustic, deliberately that way. And I don't mean orange wines necessarily. I think that's an interesting concept. I mean, if you can make white Zinfandel or a rosé out of fermenting red grapes like white wine, then why can't you do the same with white grapes? And you get a different character. But I'm talking about they're so rustic, so untouched, so, the vineyards look like they're a mess, and they're out there selling this stuff, and people feel like maybe they're doing themselves a favor. And I guess it goes back to what you were saying.
Well, and I think, there's properties in Europe that have been making biodynamic wines, natural wines, organic wines for centuries, and it just has become a trendier topic now, right? And so I think to lump everyone into one category of all natural wines are bad, or all organic or all biodynamic have a specific style or sense to them, I think can be unfair. And I think that's where we do as storytellers of our property, we have to explain why we make the certain choices we do for our wines, why if you are going to make a Nero d'Avola that you're not going to add sulfur to, why you need to drink it earlier because it doesn't have the sulfur in it, which is going to protect it long term. Or if you're going to allow your cellar to become, maybe have kind of a Brett situation going on in there, talk about it, explain why this is what's best for your product and your wine. But I think the problem, like you've mentioned, is that natural has no definition. And so I think there is a responsibility from our industry to start figuring that out, because people are using it as marketing, as we talked about, and not for quality products necessarily.
Well, there's not a definition of that. I looked it up. The FDA says natural should mean. It's not defined. It's not a code. Nothing is in there that shouldn't be in there.
Interesting.
It's certainly a bureaucrat's definition of something, right? And before we get off the subject, because I want to switch gears into women in wine here, but you have to ask your husband the following question. And I've done this to chefs, and I've done it to actual, for instance, my wife and I used to go to the fancy food show in San Francisco all the time. When we sold baskets and pastas and things. And there's a booth there called bone-sucking barbecue sauce, and you see it on the shelf all the time. And you see it at Whole Foods, places like that. And I kept getting emails from bone-sucking barbecue sauce, come visit us at booth number whatever. So I went over there, and the young man, the owner, was standing there. I said, I got a question for you. I am sitting at a steakhouse, a contemporary steakhouse, one that's respected, one that has prime beef, but they bring me a steak from 1948. Now, the FDA came around in the late 1800s, to stop charlatan, processing of food. But let's just say this is a reputable farm with a reputable butcher, and they present the exact same steak, exact same temperature, exact same seasoning. And I said, which is better? And he says, I don't know. Let me ask my mom. She used to work at a steakhouse in the 40s. So
I love it.
so she comes around. This woman, she's probably in her late 80s, and she stands there. I asked her the same question. She says, well, clearly the steak from the 40s is going to be better than today's steaks. So you can ask your husband that question, and you can probably debate it most of the evening.
I love it.
I have an Armenian type cousin, which means we're not blood related, but we call each other cousins. And he just planted 60 more vines in Southern California in a non-appellated area just around his house. And he had a custom crush come and canopy the thing and pick the grapes and make a wine. And it's actually pretty decent wine, $12 to $15 seller. But the upshot of that is that his daughter has become very interested in the subject as enology. Mm-hmm. And they came up to Napa, and I hooked them up with Molly Hill, who's a wonderful woman at Sequoia Grove, and to just understand the industry for her. And so it seems young, right, to get the bug, right?
Yes.
But she's already sort of interested in this thing due to her father. How is the women in wine movement is a very important movement. It's been happening lately. There's been a little more awareness. There's awareness about Black-owned wineries as well. But is there an association of women in wine, and what is happening in that industry that you guys are promoting?
Well, I will say it's finally getting attention. I think it's a good thing. I think women have been in the industry for a long time, but not necessarily held positions where either they've gotten much attention or they've been almost pushed into areas that are in some ways has been deemed, a little less grueling and more feminine focused, be it the lab or be it in hospitality or things like that. And I think we're finally getting to a point where I think it was back in 2011, there were only 10% of women winemakers here in the Napa Valley alone. Wow. Now I think we've magically bumped it up to 14%, but it's growing. And I think more importantly than just winemaking, the industry as a whole is growing. There's a wonderful program right now called Batonnage, and it's a women-based mentorship program that's really trying to encourage women in all aspects of the industry to get involved and how to grow and communicate and focus. And so I think for someone like me who didn't necessarily have the UC Davis training kind of background, I fell into it because I'm from the area and I just loved the concept of making something with my hands, actually a tangible product that I'd be able to taste. And so I actually started in a cellar. And so a cellar job in most people's minds is done by men because it takes a little bit more grit. It takes a little bit more beating on your body. But I think, it's something that can be done, but it just never was thought that way. So because of my background from a cellar and then working my way up, I had no choice but to fit in and make it work because I didn't want to fall behind. And so I think that level of piquing interest, you should start from the bottom. I think that's the best way to do it so that you don't get lumped into certain places, that you don't just get pigeonholed into one area. And so you can make a name for yourself within this tiny little percentage of the industry we currently have.
That brings an interesting point, the cellar rat versus the greed. And it's almost a 50. In fact, today, both you and the other winemaker I spoke with today were this ground up cellar rat thing. And that's a very fascinating part of the industry we're in because you can decide. And my daughter wanted to be a boulanger, and we told her, you got to go to college first. So she went to SC. And then she came out and she found a pastry school in Europe that she went to and that she pursued that career. And in France, though, you kind of make that decision like at 15, and I'm going to be a boulanger and I'm going to go do it. And then it becomes part of your lifestyle at that moment. At least in America, we have the choice of deciding. Is there one better than the other? Not that kind of a loaded question since you did it one way, but have you noticed the approaches to be different? It seems like they wouldn't. It seems like it would be.
I think it's great to have a degree. I think it can benefit you in a lot of ways because it's more knowledge. It's something that, it's going to be more ingrained in you at an earlier age. But I don't think it necessarily means it's the only way to do it. I think a lot of people I run into now, it's 50-50. And so I think from my perspective, not having that training, as long as I'm open to almost training myself, learning, and that's part of it. There is a passion to want to know why does a fermentation happen? I can read about that. But yes, there's always going to be classes and seminars. So I encourage anyone that maybe doesn't have the degree to take a couple wine chemistry classes, take a tasting class, take a something that is going to just educate you a little bit more. And luckily, being here, there's a lot of opportunities for that. You don't always get all those classes, but now, especially what we learned with COVID, is you can take a lot of classes online. So anything that's going to make you more well-rounded in any aspect of your industry, I think, is beneficial.
Cooking's the same way.
Yeah, exactly.
My daughter, we just found out that she moved to New York chasing somebody.
Oh, no.
We thought she actually wanted to go to cooking school. And when she got there and she was going to go to ICC, which is the old French school, she decided to call us and say, I got an offer at Prune, and I think I'm just going to take that offer. I'm like, what are you talking about? You were going to go to school. And 50-50 on the chef's side, if you ask them, should you go to cooking school or should you just start in the kitchen and work the line? And she's ended up doing both. But it's a kind of interesting thing, the women in wine. I'm reading this book by a guy named Paul Friedman. Okay. I think I told you about it earlier about the American food, but the first book was called The 10 Restaurants That Changed America. And she's talking about Le Pavillon of France in New York, Delmonico's, Howard Johnson's, because it was the roadside diner that was consistent. But one of them was called Schraff's, I don't know if it was restaurant or diner or what, and it ended up being at many, many locations, and it was designed around women to eat there. It was designed around women who were shopping. Okay, I'm not taking a position. I'm just telling you that in the 1800s, that this is what was going on, and it is the precursor to the restaurants that you see in Saks Fifth Avenue, Nordstrom, places like that. It was a place for the people that were shopping to eat. But what he did, he only hired women. So women were in the kitchen, women served, and it was 99% of the people that went in there were women for their lunch. The cuisine of that light lunch, this chicken salads, those things were born of this place. Ice cream, desserts, things like that, all born of it. And when they tried to add the element for men, like almost not a sports bar back then, but a men's gentleman's type club, didn't work. No. They boxed them out, and nobody wanted to go. And so I'm thinking that movement's been around a long time. And glad to see it in the wine world, that it's established itself. So what would you tell this young girl whose father makes Cabernet with the what's the San Fernando appellation?
Yes. Yes. For me, I think the first thing to do is wine can be very appealing just hearing about it, learning about it, tasting it. But I do think depending on which part of the industry you want to go into, I think the most important thing you can do is reach out to people within the industry. There's one wonderful thing I've found between men and women here is that people are willing to talk to you. They're willing to, walk you through what their story was, how they went through things. So then you can make those decisions. Should I go back to school? Can I just get a harvest job? Next, I would travel. I would go to different wine regions and really work a harvest in France, work a harvest in New Zealand, really make sure this is something that you have that passion for, because it can be a very love-hate relationship within a wine, because you get one shot to make it right each year.
Yeah.
And so for me, I think communicating, talking to people, reaching out, and then finding what really speaks to you. I mean, what do you imagine yourself making? What do you imagine yourself doing? Do you want to be on the road? I think really just getting out there and figuring that out is the first thing, but definitely I tell everyone, even if you're not even interested in the wine industry, come out here for harvest. It's the most magical time of year. It is beautiful chaos is the best way of putting it, because it's truly inspiring as a wine lover or just as someone who wants to kind of see if they're interested in
how do you discipline a guy who comes out here like me and then I'm kind of tired, I'm done with this for today. I don't get my bushels in or whatever.
Exactly. No, I think it's of course, and we go through it too. It's not just the highs of harvest, there's also the lows. And so but something will always bring you back, just as wine for you, as much as yes, sometimes I don't want to taste 100 Cabernet Sauvignons in one day and just be absolutely just done palate-wise, but it's the love of it that brings you back.
No, what happens is I taste, my max Tuesday, I've done 120. That's a lot. Usually it's about 65 cents. But that's always the day I come home from work and my wife says, I feel like a glass of wine.
Oh,
I'm like,
always.
No, I really don't. I'm not
I'm
interested.
going to have a cocktail or a beer, maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
That sounds a little bit better.
So I'm going to tell her that that's a great opportunity for her to come up and do that. And, Molly put it in an interesting way. That's why I had sent her up to see Molly, which was she had decided at some point in her life, what lifestyle do I want to live? Now, who asked that question, as a teenager or a young adult? I don't know. I didn't ask myself that. And she said, I want to live the lifestyle of the Napa Valley, or the wine lifestyle, which is a romantic lifestyle. It's hard work, and you and I know how hard it is to make money in it. I say it all the time. On all sides of it is very difficult. But she pats herself on the back. She'll say it, for saying, this is what I want to do, and then pursuing it. And there was a winemaker that I spoke with a few weeks ago, and he said, what other industry? Because I've met the most amazing people, had the most amazing food, and traveled to the most amazing places, and drank the most amazing wines. Hello, what else is there? Am I missing something?
Exactly. Who doesn't want that lifestyle?
Gee, that sounds pretty good to me.
Exactly.
So somebody asked, I'm always asked, when am I going to retire? And I said, I'm not going to retire. If I can get the company to run itself, which is never going to happen, but I'm never going to give up doing this.
No.
This is I think, getting the message to the consumer about what it is that we live and try to live, and try to understand what this product is. And that's more than just 14% alcohol, is an important statement to make. And if I can get them off of their $3 Groupon wines that are full of the 76 additives that we've talked about, we can move on from something.
Exactly.
There's some other competitive movements going on in the industry for that seem to be a merchandising thing to me, but probably not grounded in that in the first place. One of them is the raw movement. Isabelle Legeron, she's a French MW in the UK. She's got a group of wineries that it's not a certification. You don't have to go through a test, but you have to grow it, and you have to join it, and you have to decide this is what you're going to do. And I don't know the premise of it. I have to look it up. Another one and I met a woman who's a New York Times bestselling author. Her name is Tilar Mazio. She wrote the book Widow Clicquot, which is a really great book if you want to learn about women in wine. You're talking about 1700s.
The original.
Yeah,
the Grand Dame.
And she was worth, the equivalent of $1 billion. Not as the objective. No. Right. It was the pursuit of the path, and I can do this, rather than I need to make $1 billion. But so Tilar got the bug when she was writing the book about Veuve Clicquot, and opened a sparkling wine company in Vancouver Island, which is probably not the most hospitable place in the world to grow grapes. And she makes it raw, so she didn't even disgorge. Yeah. And I'm like, I don't know, man. I got stuff floating around in my sparkling wine. Unfortunately, COVID. She was a byproduct of COVID. She had to close. It was sad. She had to dump the wine because it's Canadian. She couldn't move it. She had to dump it. But then there's another one called Vente Méthode Naturelle Sans Sulfite Ajouté, and it's a French group. And this is the part that kind of bothers me. It's like 5 things. It's dry farmed, hand picked, no sulfite added, and something else. Okay, but when you read about it, it took them 10 years to define it. Why would that take 10 years? Maybe because they're French and they can't agree on anything. And they're giving it 3 years to try. And I thought, wait a minute, if this is a valid approach to making wine that you think is necessary for the consumers to understand and learn, why would you only give it 3 years? I mean, why isn't that just a lifestyle of what you're doing? You're making a commitment here at Rudd that we're going to do this for all the following reasons. So those reasons aren't going to change. No. You want it to feel good.
Exactly.
And taste good. I guess that's part of it.
Exactly. A little bit of it. Yes, of course.
So how's the consumer going to handle all this? Demeter, too, is another one. I mean, even though we know what Demeter stands for, at least it's an established thing, but does a consumer know what Demeter means? I mean,
Well, I think it's interesting because we are seeing a lot of these groups, movements, things coming that are part of the wine industry. And I do think it can be very cluttered for consumers. Now, that being said, I think we have to realize that some people care and some people don't. Some people just want to drink wine and just enjoy themselves, and others want to know why they like a wine. They're going to drink specific wines. And so I think for you as a state, as someone making, what is the most important thing you can do is explain why you're doing something to a consumer, which is going to hopefully be something that connects with them and they're going to want to come back here. I mean, it can be as simple as, we have consumers that come here because their last name's Rudd. No affiliation with the family, but they've made a connection in that way.
That's great.
I think, for us, though, in terms of joining more movements, having almost in some ways we have our own doctrine, we stick to it. We're not going to change with the trends and the themes. If our path aligns with another group like Demeter for the biodynamic, and down the road we feel like it's a good fit for us, of course, because we're going to be with like-minded people that support the same ideals as us. But I think just jumping onto each bandwagon or, coming up with a new group to come up with a group, if it's going to change our principles, you need to sometimes reevaluate a bit. Yeah.
You made me laugh.
Good. I do that.
Because people come here because their name is Rudd, and that happens a lot in the Valley, I'm sure. But I have a drywall contractor. Okay, and he's been using it for 30 years. He's extraordinarily overweight, and he is just probably the most uncouth guy you've ever met. Okay, he's exactly what you'd expect from an Alabama-born drywall contractor. And I'll tell you the last name so no one knows what I'm talking about. I just got a solicitation for premium champagne from Rems, beautiful, with his name on it. Nothing could be further from the irony of a premium champagne.
Wonderful.
At $100 some a bottle, and this guy, it couldn't be funnier. And I told him, I'm going to get you a couple bottles. He will not know what to do with it. He won't understand it, but because it's got his name on it,
name on the label,
it'll mean something to him.
Wonderful.
So funny.
But again, maybe this is his introduction into wine.
It could be.
This is what we need, is more people seeing wine as not on this pedestal that only a few people understand, but again, going back to the idea that there's a wine for everybody.
I kind of glassed over a subject here that I wanted to talk to you about briefly. You got to work at Petrus.
Yes.
And we were talking earlier a little bit about the experience of a winemaker, whether it's school or being a cellar rat or whatever. How important is it to somebody that wants to do this? You kind of brought it up, but to go to other countries to harvest, maybe to ferment, maybe to crush. And I mean, they're talking about, I guess if you go to the Southern Hemisphere, you can do it twice a year, right?
Oh, yes.
But do you think that rounds out the palate, rounds out the experience, rounds out what?
I think it makes you not only a more interesting person, but makes you more understanding of this industry you want to be a part of. There's so many wines being made, not only within the United States, I think, right? There's grapes growing in every state now at this point, but even outside in countries that people wouldn't even assume grapes are being grown there. And then you have your mind blown when you hear Pinot Noir is being grown, in Patagonia.
Right.
And so again, I think it is important to travel. It is important to experience it, even if it's not to work a harvest necessarily, unless that's your path, but just to go explore and learn things. And I think it's only going to make you a more well-rounded person. It's going to increase the level of your palate to really know what you enjoy. And I've been very fortunate. I got to also work in New Zealand. I did the double harvest one year.
That's right.
It was incredible. It's really what finally pushed me from my wonderful political science degree background, thought I was going to go to law school, to dropping all of that to join this industry that is completely different. And it can be those epiphany moments. For most people I know who got into this industry, a harvest it clicked for them.
You heard Mike Salachi say he took his team up to Oregon to make Pinot, and they're like, we don't make Pinot here.
Yeah.
Sorry, you're going to learn
the
most finicky grape there ever was.
Exactly.
Well, that's great advice. I mean, we love to travel. I'm trying to organize a event, and I'll get you on the list.
Please.
There's a bar called Willie's Wine Bar. It's in the First District in Paris. He's been there since the 80s. He used to work for Steven Spurrier at the Cave de Madeleine, and he's an Englishman. Okay. And I'm trying to get winemakers, and I don't have the hook yet because we're friends, and then we have a mutual friend in Melvin Masters, a negociant. But trying to get a really fun hook, like verticals of Burgundies from the 60s or 50s, or first growth vertical, or something that was like, yeah, I got to go to Paris and do this, right?
Yep.
And it'll be a hoot.
Yes.
It'll be a hoot. We're coming on an hour already. Can't believe it.
Wow.
But you're running solo. First of all, congratulations on being assigned to or promoted to, or whatever, however you want to put it, to head lead winemaker here.
Thank you
That's
very
really
much.
Exciting. But then I said, how many assistant winemakers you had? He said, none. So, I mean, even at 5,000 cases, that's quite an ominous task, isn't that?
It is, and as we were kind of talking earlier, and maybe it's something we'll reevaluate next year. But besides myself, it's my cellar master. We have our vineyard supervisor. We have our vit tech. We have our 10 people on the crew.
So let's stop right there.
Yes.
What does a cellar master do?
Cellar master, or the maitre d' if you will, is
d'.
really the one who makes sure that everything is, once it's come out of the vineyard and come in through fermentation and down into the caves through the élevage of the wine, I think they're the ones managing everything. They're making sure that wines have been topped, wines that are maintained, there are cleanliness factors to it. There's different tastings that we're going to put together. And so for him, he's really managing the wine.
Yeah, sort of. Yeah. So once you've picked it and fermented it, it's sort of, that's a huge job. Then what's the next step down from that as far as jobs?
Then you would typically have either a enologist, you'd have a cellar hand. And so I think from there, and every property is different. And France is set up even in an entirely different way than the structure here. I mean, wineries, you can have an associate winemaker, a lead winemaker, a day-to-day winemaker, a consulting winemaker, an assistant. Yeah. I mean, you can have every position.
And they're all in the phone book.
And in reality, I mean, between 4 of us from a production vineyard side, we do everything. And I think that also lends to the fact that we're not just knowledgeable in the winery, we're knowledgeable in the vineyard as well. And this stems over to hospitality, to our sales team. This is something that we're a small enough team that everyone gets involved in every aspect. I mean, I host groups as well, as much as our hospitality team will come over and help during harvest. And so I think while it does seem crazy not to have an assistant winemaker, we do have a bigger team where everyone helps in all departments.
So they're sort of cross-trained to do this stuff. But still, that's
I think Salachi kind of talked about that in his,
did, yeah.
right? And I love that idea that you're not limited in your, or like I said, pigeonholed in one little department. You really have a full knowledge of the property.
He took somebody from each department. Now they have departments over there. Okay, so at 25,000 cases, we work the numbers. It's pretty amazing. But it's not that they're bigger, because it's 5 times bigger. But they're getting. I think I figured out that probably the wholesale value I would have to pay probably $275 to $325 to me. Take off the 25% that the wholesaler gets, and you probably had $220 times 25,000 times 12. I mean, the numbers add up pretty quick.
Real fast.
And so they can have teams. They can have it. And so he took a team from the admin, the customer service, the wine growing, whatever, and then he challenged them to make, with some of the lots, to make wines, and I thought it was a brilliant thing, and they get to make the decisions on what direction it was going to go in, which just gave me a thought. If they can get together and make those decisions, are those decisions simpler if I'm going to adopt like an absolute rustic biodynamic approach, meaning I'm just going to pick the grapes that are there, they're bush vines, I'm not going to worry about the canopy, and I'm just going to pick them, I'm just going to crush them, and I'm not going to do a thing to them. Is that cut down on the responsibility? Maybe that's the reason people do it.
I actually don't think so, and I think it was Piero who actually said it's more work, it's more risk to actually do biodynamics, because you can't fall back on just one spray out there that's going to take care of your issues. Maybe, it actually does require more walks out in the vineyard. It does require a little more attention. And so I think by taking on that risk, you get better rewards, though, for it as well. It
is, that was something I had in my thought, but I didn't bring it up. one person told me it was less expensive to be organic because the pesticides are expensive, but clearly I think biodynamics is the most expensive way to farm because you almost are assigned, a block of vines per person kind of thing, because each one has, you can't broad stroke pesticide and spray them, and so whatever's happening under the ground with this one is different than the one down the way.
Yep.
I had this, and I'm going to wrap it up this thought because it's just so interesting to me. I sat with Douglas Rennie of Seguin and Moreau, and we were going through the process of making a barrel, and oddly, it actually reflected on not only grapes but other produce as well. And the comment was this: I said, "How come?" Well, let's say Natalie's going to buys 5 barrels from you, and she puts the same juice that was just come out of the tank, a fermentation tank, and puts it in the 5 barrels. But in 14 months, they're totally different. Well, not totally different wines, but they're different wines, right? You barrel select whatever you do to decide what goes in your premium brands. And I said, how is that possible? You made it, you toasted it the same way. He goes, because the white oak that we get from, let's say it's American oak, that forest changes, the soil changes from the beginning to the north, or the south, the east, or the west, or whatever direction you go. And so the wood that's coming out of the south part of the forest is different than the wood coming from the east to the north. And it's going to have different components, and it tastes different. I go, wow, that's the same probably in the vineyard, right? Same with green peppers.
Exactly.
Potentially. And it's what you eats.
Exactly.
Right? And that's an important feature, I think, when you're talking about biodynamic and our bodies. We are what we eat, eats. And I thought, wow, this is a fascinating idea that even with a tree, you're talking about
what that tree has gone through,
different characters,
is within that barrel. It's a very fascinating, way to look at everything around you.
Yeah. And I thought, he said, we don't know what the forester does, right? He's cutting the trees down and he's stripping them, and he's cutting them into staves, and we get them on a pallet. We don't know if this is all from one part of the forest or another part of the forest. Anyway, it's been a great conversation. I hope we can do it again.
Yes.
I don't want to take too much more of your time, and there's too many subjects to uncover as we go through this. So we'll reserve time next time.
Yes.
And we'll bring, I have friends that want to come see you anyway.
Excellent.
And we'll sit and taste some wine and
we
do it again.
Do the other fun side of it. You can actually sit and have a full-blown tasting.
Well, let's do it.
Oh, sounds good. Thanks for having me.
Cheers.
Cheers.